population. It's pretty much anything they can grab hold of, really. They're not particularly fussy, but the penguins we have here at Birdworld are quite fussy. We have tried them on a few different types of fish and they're not that keen, so it just is the scrap that they eat now, really. They have a super sharp beak as well, which helps them to grab hold of those super slippery fish. And they also have these little barbs or spines that run down their tongue and their throat, and that helps to direct the fish down into their stomach. So you might notice they are pretty good at catching the fish, and when they catch them, they do move them around in their bill before they eat it. It's just a lot more comfortable them to eat it head first than any other way. They do face some predators of their own out in the wild. Sharks will try and get hold of a penguin if they can, and they do have some defences that'll help them out. Their main defence though, they're pretty rubbish if they get cornered in a one-to-one situation. They're not going to defend themselves against the shark, but their main defence is not to be seen in the first place. They do have quite an effective form of camouflage called counter-shading. Now the way this works is that if there's a predator swimming above the penguin and looking down, their black back is going to camouflage them with the dark waters below, and if there's a predator below the penguin and looking up, their white underbelly is going to camouflage them with the light skies above. The camouflage on either end, that's called counter-shading. There's a few different marine animals that have that dual colour. If you think of things like sharks and whales, they tend to be coloured differently on either end, and it's just to help them stay nice and camouflaged from either their predators or their prey, so they can sneak upon their prey without being detected. They've got these little dots or speckles on their chest as well. That's called a spot pattern, and it's unique to every single one of these penguins. So each penguin will have a unique set of spots that they'll keep with them for their entire lives. And even when they molt out their feathers, they'll still keep that exact same arrangement of spots. So that's actually quite a useful way that scientists can identify them out in the wild. If they need to keep track of their population numbers, they'll just identify them based on those spots. But in practice here, that's quite difficult to do. So instead we have cheated a little bit. They have been microchipped. They've all got microchips under the back of their neck, so we can tell who's who that way. And a few of them have got wing bands on as well with a very boring number on it, so we can tell who's who that way too. Some of them have got colour bands on as well. Out in the wild, African penguins aren't doing particularly well at the moment. They are considered an endangered species, and there's a few different reasons for that. But they are predicted to go extinct in the wild within the next 15 years. So that's pretty much all of our lifetime. So that's a pretty scary prospect, really, that we won't see these guys in their wild habitat anymore. And one of the big reasons for that is humans will also eat the same fish as penguins. So things like sardines and anchovies, they're also fished by humans. There's a bit of a competition for food there. But oil spills are a really big threat to these guys too. Off the coast of Africa is a very, very popular trade route for massive ships that transport oil. And the waters just off the coast of South Africa are very, very dangerous, very, very choppy. So that means there is quite often a lot of oil spills. They don't always get put in the news, they just tend to happen. And now that is a really, really big problem for all of the wildlife that lives on the islands off the coast of South Africa. For seabirds such as penguins, the oil will get onto their feathers. They'll try and preen it out because it will affect their waterproofing. It means they can't swim, can't get their fish. And if they try to preen it, they'll end up ingesting some of that oil, and that will poison them in the long term. It will do terrible things to their fish supply as well in the future. So even after the initial impact of the oil spill, many years later, that will still be a problem. The biggest oil spill that happened in recent years was in the year 2000, and about 20,000 penguins were affected by that. There is a charity out there that is helping the African penguins though. We actually work quite closely with them. It's called Sankcob, and that saves like seabirds as well as penguins and other birds and other animals out there as well that are affected by these oil spills. We do work quite closely with them, and we are helping here at Birdworld just by having the penguins here. It means we can tell you guys a bit about them. It also means we can breed them as well. We do have a few youngsters in the group. They're identifiable because they're greyer than the others. There's one just in the water here making his way to the left-hand side. He's quite a bit duller than the other penguins. He hasn't got those full black and white markings on his head. So he was born this year, so he's still a youngster. He's only a few months old. They grow in height quite quickly, but it does take a while for their plumage to develop. So we do breed them. These two up here on the platform were actually hand-reared from a couple of years ago, so they were raised by us, not by their penguin parents, so they do stay quite tame. This is why they're up here. They're after a little bit of attention, a little bit of fuss, and they kind of know that they get more fish up here, so they're being quite smart as well, really. Yeah, we do breed them. We do quite well with breeding penguins here. And the idea of breeding is not to release them into the wild, obviously, because the problems that are out there affecting them are still a threat. But as those problems, over time, get better managed, and maybe one day zoos can look at releasing endangered species back into the wild one day, and that's a pretty exciting prospect, really. But that is about it for the penguins. We do have plenty of other birds in here. The speckled pigeons that are just having a little sit down on the hill over there are pretty much Africa's equivalent to our feral pigeon. We've got the sacred ibis up in that tree. At the moment, there's 9 of them altogether.